Well, hello there, friends
Hi,
and
Rhonda.
enemies
And friends.
and enemies,
And people we're neutral about.
friends,
Kind of
Romans, countrymen.
countrymen. People we don't have an opinion about. Yeah.
There's probably a lot of those.
Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
welcome back, or welcome if this is your
Or,
first
or
time.
welcome.
Welcome, all are welcome. How do we've been doing this? Okay, Erin, we've been doing this for 3 years, and we still have no idea how to start this. Okay.
Well, how to
I can't
start,
even say
how to end. We're
I
just
can't I can't even say the word this. Oh my gosh.
well,
I have grad school brain. That's what I'll blame it on.
nice. What do I blame it on?
You teach preschoolers, so
Hey, there we
there's
go. There we go.
yeah. Well,
Well,
now that
welcome.
it's sufficiently awkward, hello.
Yeah. We are talking about one of
Uh
our favorites today.
yes, we are. We are Pop DNA, by the way. I'm
Yeah.
Rhonda.
I'm
Hi.
Erin. Hi. Hello.
Hello. Um, we were talking about A Wrinkle in Time. I guess the movie, the 2018 movie and the book. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
going to kind of weave in and out of talking about both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Uh, so what do we do? What do we do?
Well, I mean, I guess for
what's
those,
what the heck is A Wrinkle in Time?
what on earth is that? So, we have a brief synopsis in case you've never seen it. It is kind of a niche market.
Or in case you just forgot,
Yeah.
like you read it in third grade and you haven't
Mm-hmm.
looked at it since.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah.
according to Spark Notes, and I agree,
Huh.
A Wrinkle in Time is the story of Meg Murray, a high school aged girl who is transported on an adventure through space and time with her younger brother, Charles Wallace, who is something of a genius for his young age, and her friend Calvin, to rescue her father, who is a gifted scientist and who has been transported away from them as he discovers kind of the presence in the universe of something called a tesseract.
Ooh.
And he gets held as a prisoner on another planet because of this discovery, kind of thing.
And Meg and Charles Wallace and Calvin are aided in their journey by three enigmatic, possibly supernatural beings.
Yeah,
That's never fully clear.
yeah.
Um, that we like to call the Mrs. Mrs. Who, Mrs. Whatsit, and Mrs. Witch. And yeah, it was very formative to my childhood, I have to say.
Me too.
Yeah. So so the author of A Wrinkle in Time is of course Madeleine L'Engle. I don't know. I still don't know how to pronounce her name. Is it L'Engle?
Langle.
L'Engle? There's an
Yeah,
apostrophe in there.
yeah.
Not sure. But it was published in 1962. It's the same age as my dad. It won the Newbery Medal
Ooh.
for children's literature. It won the Sequoia Book Award, the Lewis Carroll Shelf Award, and it was a runner-up for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. So,
Yeah,
even at the time that it came out, it was recognized as an important work,
yeah.
and now it's a classic. So,
It's also, as I look at the fact that it's from 62, that is evident in kind
yes, it's
of,
definitely Cold War,
yeah.
uh, nuclear,
Hmm.
uh, nuclear
Hmm.
scares, that whole thing.
It,
Yeah,
it's also,
they're worried about nuclear bombs a
yeah,
lot
I would
at
also
the
argue
time.
that it's a little bit trippy. Like, it's a little bit, like, the magic in it is a little bit like,
Yeah, is it magic or is it science? That's
We don't know.
we'll discuss that later.
Yeah.
Yes. But it does involve space and time in
Hmm.
really interesting and at the time kind of groundbreaking ways.
Yeah.
It was the first book of L'Engle's Time Quintet. Have you read the rest of these books, Erin?
I haven't. I only read the
You
one.
haven't?
I know.
You
It's
should. Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
kind of funny to be a super fan of the first book and to have never made it to the other
Yeah,
two.
well, lots of people have only read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and didn't
Valid.
read the rest
Mhm.
of Chronicles of
Mhm.
Narnia. I totally get that too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say A Wind in the Door, which came out in 1973, but
Yeah.
A Wind in the Door is like I would say like a direct sequel to A Wrinkle in Time. So
Okay.
I'd recommend at least reading that one,
Okay.
even if you don't read any of the others. And then A Swiftly Tilting Planet was in 1978. And that one is probably my favorite out of the whole series, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's about, so it's 10 years after A Wrinkle in Time. So Charles Wallace is like 15 or 16, and it's
Mhm.
about him. And he goes on, he like, he quantum leaps. This was before the show Quantum Leap, but that's basically what he does. He quantum leaps into the past,
Oh,
into
wow.
like other, like people in the past. Um,
Ooh.
it's very, yes. I read it every Thanksgiving because it takes place on Thanksgiving.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, and then Many Waters from 1986, which was about Sandy and Dennis, the twin brothers who are not in the 2018 movie.
Yeah.
And then An Acceptable Time from 1989, which is about Meg and Calvin's oldest daughter, Polly.
Okay.
So, yeah. And it kind of has An Acceptable Time has like threads and connections to all of the other books too, because you
Cool.
like see things kind of referenced and brought up again. So,
Very cool.
yes, that is that is the deal on the Time Quintet.
Yeah. There were
But
also
yeah, let's talk about the movies.
two movies, the 2003, which at the time when I saw it on TV, I remember looking at seeing it advertised and thinking, someone else knows about this book that I'm obsessed with. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And so at the time I thought it was the best movie I'd ever seen. Not
Yes, I loved it too. Yeah.
maybe not the case. Uh it was produced it was a joint
Well, it was made for
production.
TV, which
Mhm.
like at the time, like a movie that was made for TV, like you could expect like super low budget and like not
Yeah.
great production quality.
And
Like that was
it was a joint too between Canada and the United States. They came together to make Wrinkle in Time. And
well, how diplomatic of them.
I know. And I love the quote that you found here when Langle was reviewing the film, and
Hmm.
how she says that she was asked if it had met her expectations, and she said, "I have glimpsed it. I expected it to be bad, and it is." That's delightful. That's
I like how she
just
said, I have glimpsed it. Like she couldn't bring herself to actually watch it. So I just imagine her like sitting in front of a TV, like going like this, like covering her eyes and peeking through to like glimpse this movie that, is attempting to represent her masterpiece.
the next time I grade anything for my students, I want to say I have glimpsed it.
I have glimpsed it. And
Although it does have
uh,
Alfre Woodard in it, who
Alfre
is
Woodard, yes.
phenomenal.
And a
Um,
very young Gregory Smith who seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth, quite honestly.
yeah,
Like what happened to that kid?
maybe it was a
Um
tesseract. We don't know.
maybe. Or maybe he just decided to be a normal adult and not be an actor. That could be
Yeah,
possible too.
yeah. Some might even call that a good choice.
Mm.
Do you want to tell us about
Yes.
2018's?
Let's talk about the 2018 movie because that's, I'm sure, what most modern viewers are going to be familiar with. So, the 2018 film was directed by Ava DuVernay with a script by Jennifer Lee and Jeff Stockwell. Jennifer Lee was, of course, involved with Frozen. I believe she directed and, right? Yes, she directed Frozen. Yes. And maybe wrote the screenplay for Frozen as well, possibly.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. I could look it up, but okay. Um, and this version starred Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, Mindy Kaling, Chris Pine, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Storm Reed, Michael Pena, and Zach Galifianakis. And I always forget. Every time, I always forget that Zach Galifianakis is in this movie. And then
Oh,
I
yeah.
watch it again. I'm like,
What?
the guy from The Hangover, what are you doing in this movie for children?
How are you the happy medium? But okay.
How is that? Yeah, interesting. Um, and that's really the only casting choice that I find questionable. All the
Yeah.
others, home run.
Oh, yeah.
But Zach Galifianakis, why?
Oh.
Oh no, Erin left. I hope she comes back. Um, anyway, this. So you got cut off a little bit there.
I did.
But we're back. Don't worry, everyone. We are back.
It's proof
So
Zach Galifianakis runs Zoom. He wasn't happy we were talking.
Also, you're sideways right now. I don't know if that will come across in the final video. I don't think it will, but just anyway. So we were talking.
Cool.
Yes. So the 2018 movie.
Yes.
That bafflingly cast Zach Galifianakis. But fun fact about this movie, this was the first $100 million budget live action film to be directed by a Black woman. So, all right.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah,
Disney.
yeah.
Not go Disney. Disney doesn't need our support.
No.
But go Eva DuVernay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell me about your first experience with A Wrinkle in Time?
Yes.
Or just your whole life story as relates to A Wrinkle in Time?
It all started on a stormy night in Santa Monica.
Was it a dark and stormy night?
It was. And it felt like that Miss What's-It quote where she talks about how wild nights are her glory.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother gave me a copy of this very novel, and I think I was in third grade. And I remember it was the first time a world of a story had really like enveloped me in its arms, and I was just so into it. I think other things I had read at the time were like Charlotte's Web and like just not maybe as exciting. And then A Wrinkle in Time kind of opened the door, if you will, to my love of science fiction and fantasy and world building. And I think from maybe the first chapter, because the first chapter is really magical, right? The first chapter, you meet Charles Wallace, and then he kind of knows something's happening and there's a storm, and then Mrs. Whatsit comes in, and she's very charming, and um, she's in all of the sheets trying to find like a sheet or something. And I was just so taken by her. It was my first character who'd ever been like whimsical too. So from that first chapter, I was in it. What about you?
Yeah, I think I first picked it up when I was in, I think, fourth grade. And it was in my teacher had a classroom library, as you know, as elementary teachers often do. And I was looking for something to read that was like, I think I'd like just read Chronicles of Narnia.
Uh-huh.
And so I was looking for something to read that would give me that same kind of like experience. And I picked up A Wrinkle in Time from the classroom library. And I read it. Like I'd
Yeah.
never like no adult like handed it to me and said, "Oh, you should read this book." I just like picked it up and read it. And yeah, it was as I've said before, it was formative to my childhood. I think this was um the first time I saw a girl as the protagonist who was very smart, very intelligent, but also felt very uncomfortable in her own skin, and I think just captured uh that perfect like balance that you're going through when you're like 10, 11, 12 years old and you
Yeah.
feel like all these changes happening like in your body and in your mind and in how you perceive the world. And yeah, it
Yeah.
was just I hardcore identified with Meg, even though I hated math. I was like, Meg, you can have the math. I'll take the
Uh-huh.
social studies. We're good.
Perfect.
Yeah, and uh yeah, I guess that's my story.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. And of course then I read, I think like right away after I finish it, I was like, "Oh, are there more books? Are there
Uh-huh.
more?" And so right away I read A Wind in the Door. And then I don't think that I read A Swiftly Tilting Planet until maybe a couple years later.
Okay.
Um, but then it, became my favorite, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have some other forms of media that have adapted A
Mm-hmm.
Wrinkle in Time here. What do you know about the Wrinkle in Time opera?
So, it's very hard. I don't know if there's like a studio recording of it even, because it was just listed on like a composer's website, so it's not even
Mm,
maybe mass produced, but it's a one act, seven scene opera that explores the world of of Wrinkle in Time through opera. And I couldn't find, I spent maybe like an hour trying to research it, and there's not a whole lot. Libby Larson wrote it and kind of adapted it, but there's not a whole lot on it. But I was just fascinated, and I think opera is a very meta thing, not Facebook
yeah.
meta, but meta meta. And I think it could actually work really well as an opera, whereas some adaptations, I'm like, God, no. Like the fact that they're making Silver Linings Playbook the musical makes me want to like never see that. But I think that an opera that explores A Wrinkle in Time could explore kind of the worlds that they go into, and maybe like 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D, all of those things could have like a different musical thing. I don't know what they did with it, but I'm really excited to have music explore those dimensions. So I got real excited. Yeah. And then
Interesting.
swiftly found out that there's not much about it. So
Uh-huh.
but I was excited about it because I think opera and ballet are at their most interesting when they're exploratory and kind of not like concrete. When they're very meta, I think it works better. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I was excited.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And then I also found that there's a comic book, which also makes all the sense to me in the world. I think this
Yeah.
makes sense as a comic book.
Absolutely.
Because a lot
I will have
of,
to I will have to check that out actually. I'm
yeah.
gonna put that on my list.
I feel like there's a lot of things in here that are so especially to an elementary school mind, that like it introduces a lot about the world, right? It
Mm-hmm.
introduces a lot about like science and quantum physics and math and all of those
Right.
things. So using that to also introduce the world of comic books, or the world
Mm.
of opera to children, I think is a really cool thing, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that has just gone into my Amazon cart. The Wrinkle in
Yay!
Time graphic novel. Um, yeah. So, those are interesting ways of like adapting this story. Um, which like I think the graphic novel. I think you're right. I think the graphic novel makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a, it's such a, like, it's such an imagery rich story. It
Mm-hmm.
makes sense to put it into a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Um, the opera I'm very curious about because
Right.
like how
And that's
how
the
does that
thing.
work?
As I was speaking about it, I caught myself, I already have very high expectations. And I already want them to be like exploring dimension, and the different dimensions have different
Uh-huh.
musical cues and whatever. And so it could not be that. I don't
That's
know.
true.
It
Yeah.
could very
Um
easily just be awful. I don't know.
uh yeah, but I think it's like it's interesting to like think about a story like told through a different medium or told through a different perspective from the one that we're familiar with. Um,
Right, right.
I think that's like what a good adaptation does is it like it can take that original, the perspective that is present in the original work, but then expand upon that and give us a different perspective
Yeah.
on the story and on the characters. Even if it still includes that original perspective, which I think is what a good adaptation does.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I wanted to. So we had planned in this first part. I had wanted to talk about religion because
Yeah.
I love talking about religion, kind of sarcastically, but kind of not.
Well,
Yeah, but
yeah. And in this piece, it's like at the forefront, you know?
right, yeah, and I think it's interesting. The one thing that I kind of wish that the 2018 movie had done, they wouldn't have had to make it like so like overt or explicit as it is in the novel, but I do wish that it had kept somewhat of the religious or the spiritual undertones of the
Yeah.
book. And like I understand why they didn't, but I still think that it could have been done in a way that wouldn't have alienated people who are not of this religion.
Yeah.
I think they could have found a way to do it.
I agree, especially because I think of this piece as like a child's exploration of science and of religion and of the world around them. And both pieces are so important to it and to
Mm-hmm.
like the journey, that leaving it out isn't fully telling the story, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that like L'Engle herself would like she's been kind of quoted and noted as saying that like she didn't understand this dichotomy in our culture between religion and science.
Right.
Like why do you have to choose one over the other? Like that was
Right.
something that she was very vocal about exploring and about expressing. Um she just a little background about Madeleine L'Engle, if we want to get into that. She considered herself a devout Christian. She never,
Yeah.
I don't think that she ever like identified with a certain like denomination. She attended an Anglican church for most of her life, but she wouldn't have said that like she's a certain brand of Christianity.
Sure.
Um, and what I think is like really interesting is that, uh, so like a lot of like more conservative Christians didn't like A Wrinkle in Time because they said that it was like promoting witchcraft or the occult. But then you also had like, you know, on the more secular side, people objecting to like the overt Christian themes in the book. So it's like too religious, not religious enough. Pick a lane,
Right.
pick a lane.
Right.
Really interesting. There's a quote from her journal where she said, "If I've ever written a book that says what I feel about God and the universe, this is it. This is my psalm of praise to life, my stand for life against death."
Wow.
And she also wrote that publishers had trouble. It's so like the story of how A Wrinkle in Time finally got published, it took years and like 30, 40, 50 plus rejections before it was finally published. And
Yeah.
she said of that process that publishers had a hard time with A Wrinkle in Time. She says because it deals overtly with the problem of evil. And the publishers, at least, said that it was too difficult for children. They would ask, is it a children's or an adult's book anyhow? It's both. Um, I think she also I think she also has, um, I don't have the quote in front of me, but I think she was also quoted as saying something to the effect of like, for something to be good enough for children, it needs to be good enough for adults. I'm like, yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Um,
How
a
are we going to get these
relative,
kids to read if they don't love it? Anyway, sorry.
right? Yeah. Um, uh, let's see, a relative, is this a relative of hers or was it a critic? I don't remember. I just have the quote anyway. So there's a quote about her that says she preferred scientific metaphors and scientists to theologians because she understood that science is more open to revelation than religion. And religion divides us into teams, which I think that's such an interesting thought too, that
Right.
like religion, which so many religions ostensibly are built on revelations, and yet
Yeah.
they're often closed off to them. Whereas in science, it's a very open ended process, and you're constantly making new discoveries, um,
And
which is interesting.
it's almost like the process of getting this published and the process of giving this work to people proved her point about the need for putting people in teams. Like, you're
Right.
proving what she's talking about, you
Yeah.
guys.
um, she also wrote that it was kind of A Wrinkle in Time is kind of her rebuttal to some German theology that she had read, who like she complained that like these German theologians were like too rigid in their answers to like these big spiritual questions. She says, it was also my affirmation of a universe in which I could take note of all the evil and unfairness and horror and yet believe in a loving creator. So just kind of the idea of like not having to have an answer for everything and being able to be open and hold space for things that we don't understand and can't explain,
Yeah.
which I think is also huge in A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, and then another thing that like conservative Christians at the time objected to about A Wrinkle in Time, was what like the idea of like spiritual relativism because the book names Jesus alongside uh, like people like Shakespeare and Buddha and like famous scientists and artists, and they're like
Right.
yeah. um uh and then going back to that idea of like this like false dichotomy and like picking a side or picking a lane. Um, we see conformity as one of the big themes in A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Not just on Camazotz, but also like how Meg feels like she has to try to conform to the world that she's in, or like her rejection of conformity going to extremes in some
Yeah.
ways.
And
Um,
everyone thinks Charles Wallace is like the weirdest weirdo when he does
mhm,
not listen to any of these like social norms or conformity kind of things.
right. Um, so this article that I found about the religion and faith of Madeleine L'Engle also notes that conservative Christians were not only confused by the book, but they also proved its point by forcing conformity to a certain way of thinking. So, like, goes right over the heads there.
Right.
um, this article is in the Washington Post, I should note, and we will provide a link so everyone can check it out. Um, but this kind of concludes. So this article was published like right before the movie came out in 2018. So it kind of concludes with like, um, asking like, would she have liked this adaptation of her book? She didn't like the 2003 one, but but would she have liked this one? And I don't know. And so this article interviewed her granddaughter, who saw an early version of the 2018 movie, and said that it gave her the same feelings of inspiration and optimism as the book. Um,
Yeah.
Another L'Engle expert believes that L'Engle would have loved the reinterpretation that made the main character, Meg Murray, a black girl from an interracial marriage. For its time, L'Engle's book was groundbreaking by portraying Meg Murray's mother as a well-educated scientist with doctoral degrees, and who worked, um,
Yeah.
a middle. I think I think their family is kind of portrayed as kind of upper middle class, um, which when that was the case back then, the mother usually would not have a job. So
Right. Right.
that's kind of groundbreaking in its own way. Um, yeah, so that's a whole bunch of thoughts that I didn't really organize, but do with that
No.
what you will.
No. I
Yeah.
I yeah, I just really think L'Engle is like the coolest. She's one of my like tip top, I don't know, superheroes. I just think she's
Mhm.
so neat. And it's interesting to see her kind of do to the world what the Mrs. W's do for the Calvin's kids. Is she kind of opens it up that there are other things going on and there are other universes out
Mhm.
there. She does that for thought processes, and she does that for thinking about like like you said, just because you're religious, you don't have to say, oh, science isn't a thing. Like they can, everything can work together on this earth. And maybe it's supposed to. So
Yeah.
I love her a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, she's really neat. Um so this was another topic that we weren't sure where to put it. So we'll just stick it on the end here.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about Mrs. Who and how like she speaks in quotations. Um, because you and I do that sometimes.
All the time. Hmm.
Which I think is great. And I think that like Mrs. Who always speaking in quotations kind of plays into that theme of like conformity versus being open-minded and holding space for things that you can't always quantify or understand. um
Yeah.
because in a way that's kind of why Mrs. Who speaks in quotations, is because she can't like verbalize, as in like she can't take the thought that she's having and make it concrete.
Yeah.
into words.
Yeah.
And so she just uses other words that kind of get to the heart of what she's trying to say.
Well, it's interesting too because it's something that we see children do as they play with language. They will mimic, sometimes they'll mimic what someone else has said instead of finding other words to use because they're playing with language and because they're playing with words, and words are fun, and they heard someone say something and so now they're repeating it to you, and I think that's another really interesting thing about Mrs. Who in a story where we're talking about childhood intelligence and how children express themselves. Something I love about kids is that they'll like give you a phrase from a book or a phrase from a song and it'll perfectly encapsulate what they're trying to say. They're like little Mrs. Who's. I love it.
Uh-huh. And I think it's also a great way to like kind of a sneaky way for the author to like sneak in references to like things that she's inspired by. So
Yeah.
like I think of like the in the book, I don't think she does this in the movie, but in the book she quotes The Tempest right before Meg goes to find her father inside of the like clear column thing where he's
Yeah.
like, and she quotes the part in The Tempest that's like, here, I have the book in front of me, I can find it. He's trapped in a what is the phrase? He's trapped in a oh here. For that he was a spirit too delicate to act their earthly and abhorred commands. Refusing their grand hests, they did confine him by help of their most potent ministers, and in their most unmitigable it's a fun word, unmitigable rage into a cloven pine, within which rift imprisoned he didst painfully remain. Um, so I love that reference to the Tempest, not only because it like kind of literally describes what is going to happen later on in the book, but I also just love the idea of referencing the Tempest as like another work that has this kind of mystery or this kind of like shady line in between magic and reality.
Yeah.
Um, and like characters who are kind of trapped not just in location but in like a way of thinking,
Yeah.
um and eventually have to kind of like get think their way out of that. um
Yeah.
yeah, and also I just love The Tempest.
Uh-huh.
It's my
Yeah.
favorite, so yeah, so I think that's, if we're talking about our favorite Mrs. Who quote from the book, it would be that one for me.
Yeah.
But from the movie, it's the Hamilton quote.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Cause,
Tomorrow there'll be more of us. Yes, I love it.
well, especially because that quote, in March for Our Lives, that quote was used in a song, Tomorrow There'll Be More of Us.
Hmm.
So it takes on that as well and makes, I get chills and I love it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it connects it to that. It connects it to that kind of universal struggle of good versus evil.
Yeah.
The downtrodden versus the oppressor. Like
Yeah.
yeah, that universal connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also just love Mindy Kaling's delivering of
Uh-huh.
all the lines. Like, it's just so serene and like, here you go. Here's like a truth sandwich. There you go.
Hmm.
Just enjoy. Um, oh, I love it.
Oh, Mindy.
Oh, Mindy.
Mm, we love her.
Yeah.
Listeners, if you are new around here, you might not know. We did an entire bonus episode a couple years ago, just talking about the life and works of Mindy Kaling. So
We love her.
go
Like a
check that
lot.
out.
We love her.
We love her a
Um,
lot. Hi, Mindy.
Hi,
If
Mindy.
you're
Not the
if you're watching,
not the point, but she looks gorgeous in this movie. Oh my gosh, I just like, oh, oh man.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, the costumes and the makeup and the hair
Oh my
in this
gosh.
movie,
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
like, I want to recreate some of these
Yeah.
looks, but I don't even know where to start. Um,
That's another
anyway,
quote that I love is when the three Mrs. W's quote, "When shall we three meet again?" in the field. Ugh, gives me chills. Love it. Love, love, love,
hmm yes,
love it.
yes, another Shakespeare connection. Uh, well, that's about all we had for this week.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap this up. Yeah, you know where you hopefully you know where you can find us. We're on Instagram and Twitter, and we
Mm-hmm.
post things there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It with no little to no consistency. Um,
No.
but it's usually entertaining, at least to us.
Here, here at Pop DNA, that we have no time for consistency. We
Oh
don't know
no.
what that means.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah.
Uh
Um,
join us next time.
and please be good to each other. It's really hard out there. So please,
Yeah,
please consider others.
please do. And we'll see you anon.
Anon.
Anon. Goodbye.